Why was everyone so quick to dismiss her? Maybe it was her quiet voice. Maybe it was the way she never demanded attention. Or maybe it was because no one in that facility knew what she had already survived. Clara Jamison stood at the edge of the briefing table, silent, her brown hair tied back in a plain ponytail, her slender frame almost blending into the white walls of the military hospital. To most, she was invisible, a nurse, competent but unremarkable. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She never interrupted a doctor mid-sentence. She took her shifts, logged her hours, and faded into the background. And yet there was something about the way her hands moved, small things no one noticed. She replaced wilted flowers in patient rooms before families arrived. She stitched small cuts with the same precision she gave to chest wounds. She spent her lunch break reassuring a worried mother 3 time zones away that her son was still alive. To Clara, none of it was small. Every wound mattered. Every life counted. But the others, they whispered. "She's too soft," Dr. Martinez muttered one afternoon, shaking his head as he watched her carefully adjust a bandage. "She won't last," Dr. Richardson agreed. "Not with the big cases. She's not cut out for pressure." The younger nurses laughed quietly in the break room, glancing at Clara where she sat alone at a corner table, eating her sandwich with a medical journal open in front of her. "She never says a word. She's not leadership material. She'll burn out the moment things get bad." Clara didn't respond, she didn't even look up, but she heard every word. What none of them knew was that Clara had already been tested in ways they couldn't imagine. Because there was something she never spoke about, something she carried in her pocket every single day, a faded, blood-stained bandage. Old, worn to threads, it wasn't sterile, it wasn't useful, but it was hers. Sometimes between patients, she would touch it with the tips of her fingers as if drawing strength from it. It wasn't just cloth, it was a memory, a talisman. It was Ramadi. But Clara never said the word out loud. Not here. Not in the sterile, air-conditioned corridors of this hospital where people thought stress meant a short-staffed night shift. They couldn't know. They wouldn't believe her if she told them anyway. And maybe she preferred it that way. Still, Janet, the senior orderly who had been in this facility longer than most doctors, noticed. Janet always noticed. "I've been watching her," she told a colleague one night as they scrubbed trays in the dim light of the ward. "She treats every wound like it's the most important thing in the world. I saw her spend 20 minutes stitching a paper-thin cut on a soldier's hand. It could have healed fine with a bandage, but she worked it like it was life or death, like she was holding him together." Janet paused, drying her hands. "It's like she's done this before, somewhere important." And she had. But Clara said nothing. She rose every morning 30 minutes before her shift, walked into the facility when the halls were still half dark, and checked on every patient from the night before. She replaced water pitchers, adjusted pillows, even mended small tears in uniforms or blankets without telling anyone. Quiet rituals of care, invisible acts of service. They didn't see her when she bent over Sergeant Kelly at 2:00 a.m., calming his nightmares from the blast that had nearly killed him. They didn't hear her when she stayed late to help a young private write a letter home, his hands trembling too badly to hold a pen. They didn't notice the way she patched Dr. Richardson's torn lab coat, perfect stitches so clean he never realized it had been mended at all. She was everywhere, she was no one. And then one night, everything changed. It began at 3:00 a.m. The sound of screeching tires outside the facility tore through the fragile quiet of the ward. Clara opened her eyes instantly. She had trained herself to sleep light, one ear always open, a habit burned into her in another life. Then came the shouting, the metallic clang of stretchers, boots pounding on tile. The loudspeaker crackled, multiple casualties incoming, all hands to emergency. Clara was already moving before the announcement ended. Her ponytail was tied, her gloves pulled on, her body in motion like a machine that had never really stopped. When the first stretcher burst through the doors, the air changed. Diesel, blood, cordite, familiar smells, familiar chaos. The facility wasn't ready. Dr. Richardson froze at the trauma bay entrance, his face pale. "This is too many," he stammered. "We don't have enough staff. We can't handle this." Dr. Martinez backed away, shaking his head. "We need to transfer some. Call backup. We'll lose control of this." But Clara stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "No." Everyone turned. She didn't raise her tone, didn't shout, but the authority in her words was undeniable. "We handle this now." Her eyes swept the room like a commander surveying a battlefield. Red tags to Trauma Bay 1. Yellow tags, hold here for triage. Green tags to the waiting area. Anyone who can walk against that wall. The wounded soldiers looked at her, bloody, broken, terrified, and for some reason they listened. Dr. Richardson grabbed her arm. "Nurse Jamison, you can't just make these calls. We need protocol." Clara turned, and for the first time, something sharp flashed in her eyes. A glimpse of the woman she tried so hard to keep buried. Protocol doesn't save lives when you're drowning in casualties. She pulled free and moved to the first patient. Pressure here, tourniquet there. Orders crisp, steady, unquestionable. 2 units of O-negative now. Sutures in room 3. Check vitals on the sergeant, 3rd bed left. Dr. Peters, young, fresh from residency, stared at her. "Who gave you the authority?" "The dying," Clara cut him off, not looking up from the intubation she was performing. "The dying gave me authority, unless you'd like to explain to his wife why he's dead while we argued." Her voice didn't shake, her hands didn't falter. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. Staff who had doubted her froze, then moved. Nurses who whispered about her obeyed her commands. Even the doctors found themselves watching, listening. She worked like someone who had done this before, not once, not twice, hundreds of times. And she had. But they didn't know that yet. Why did the chaos seem to bend around her instead of break her? That was the question no one could answer. Not yet. The facility had become a storm. Stretchers collided through the doors, soldiers screaming, medics shouting, alarms blaring. The sharp sting of antiseptic mixed with the copper tang of blood until the air itself felt suffocating. People were running, panicked, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. And in the middle of it all, Clara. Her hands didn't shake, her voice didn't waver, her pace never faltered. She moved from patient to patient like a conductor leading an orchestra through a chaotic symphony of life and death. "Pressure here, tourniquet tighter, keep him talking. He's going into shock. You get me a unit of plasma now." She didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask if it was allowed. She simply acted, and the more she acted, the more others followed. Dr. Richardson, still pale, found himself obeying her instructions before he even realized it. Dr. Martinez, who had doubted her, stopped protesting and grabbed supplies at her command. Even Peters, the young doctor who had challenged her authority, now found himself hanging on her words like a lifeline. But there was something else, something unexplainable. The way she triaged patients, faster than anyone in the room. She looked once, twice, and seemed to know which wounds could wait, which would collapse in minutes, which soldier had only seconds left. It was instinct born from something deeper than textbooks or training. It was the eye of someone who had already faced the unthinkable. Janet, the senior orderly, stood still for a moment, watching. She had worked with Clara long enough to know her quiet rituals, her invisible acts of kindness. But this was something she had never seen before. "She's done this," Janet whispered to herself. "God help me, she's done this before." By hour 4, the floor was slick with blood. By hour 6, the staff was breaking down. Nurses leaned against walls, trembling. Peters collapsed into a chair, sweat soaking through his scrubs. But Clara never stopped. Her ponytail clung damp against her neck. Her scrubs were streaked in blood, none of it hers. Her hands ached, her muscles screamed, but she kept moving, patient to patient, wound to wound. At one point, a 19-year-old Marine lay on the table before her, his leg mangled beyond recognition. He was pale, his lips trembling. "Am I going to die?" he whispered. Clara knelt down so her eyes met his. Her voice was steady but soft. "Not on my watch. Tell me your name." "Thompson," he whispered. "Thompson, you're going home, but I need you to talk to me. Tell me about it. Where home?" As she worked, starting an IV, adjusting a tourniquet, his eyes flickered. "Indiana." "What's in Indiana?" "My dog, Brown Lab. His name's Cooper." "Good, then you're going to tell Cooper you made it back. Keep breathing for me." Her hands moved faster than her words, but she never broke contact with him. And when his blood pressure stabilized, when his breathing steadied, Clara finally exhaled too. It wasn't the first time that night. It wouldn't be the last. By hour 12, the staff was unraveling. Panic clawed at the edges. They had treated more patients in one night than they had in entire months. The supply room was thinning out. Exhaustion weighed heavy. And still Clara pressed on. When a younger nurse broke down crying, Clara put a steady hand on her shoulder. "Breathe, you're okay. We can do this. Just focus on the one in front of you." Her words weren't dramatic. They weren't loud, but they carried a calm authority that cut through the chaos. Dr. Martinez found himself whispering to Richardson as they watched her. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" Richardson shook his head slowly. "It's like she's done this 100 times." "More than that," Janet muttered. And then they noticed something else, the strip of fabric around her wrist. An old bandage, faded brown with age, stained with blood that wasn't fresh. She had wrapped it tightly, almost like an anchor. Between patients, her fingers brushed against it briefly, a ritual, a reminder. No one knew what it meant. No one dared to ask. By hour 15, Clara's body was betraying her. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her knees wobbled beneath her. Her back screamed with every bend. She had consumed nothing but bitter coffee and raw determination. But she refused to stop. When Peters collapsed completely at hour 16, Clara didn't hesitate. She took over his patient, a soldier with severe internal bleeding, his heartbeat faltering. Without pause, Clara began chest compressions, her small frame generating impossible strength. "Come on," she whispered between compressions. "Come on, stay with me. Your fight isn't over." The monitor flatlined, then blipped once, twice, a rhythm. He was back. The staff stared in silence. Some whispered prayers, others just watched her with awe. Clara didn't notice. She was already moving to the next patient. By hour 18, she was trembling with exhaustion, her arms heavy, her knees unstable. Sweat soaked her scrubs. The Ramadi bandage clung damp against her wrist. But still, she sutured the final wound of the night, a boy barely 18, barely old enough to shave. As she tied the last knot, her legs gave out. She caught herself against the metal table, her palms flat, chest heaving. The room swam, spinning. And then silence. She turned slowly. A Marine stood at attention behind her, older than the wounded around them. His uniform crisp, his posture perfect. But his eyes were fixed not on her face, but on the bandage wrapped around her wrist. Recognition dawned. His shoulders straightened even more, if that was possible. He raised his hand in a sharp, perfect salute. His voice cut through the silence, strong and unshakable. "Ramadi medic." The words fell like thunder. Every sound in the facility died at once. Every head turned. Every breath seemed to stop. Clara froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She hadn't heard those words spoken aloud in 3 years. Not since the desert. Not since nights when gunfire rattled walls and explosions shook the sky. Her throat closed. Her chest tightened. Dr. Richardson whispered, confused. What's Ramadi medic? The Marine's eyes never left Clara's. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. I was there, ma'am. Ramadi, 2019. You saved my squad leader's life, and about 40 others. Clara's knees weakened. The air felt heavier. Rodriguez's voice trembled with something rare for a Marine: reverence. For 6 months, every time we took heavy casualties, every time things went bad, there was always this nurse. Never told us her name, never asked for recognition, just showed up, patched us together, kept us alive. We called her the Ramadi medic. He gestured to the soldiers in the room, all of them alive because of Clara tonight. This is what she did every single day, in a place worse than hell. And suddenly, everything was different. The staff who had doubted her stood frozen, pale with realization. Janet's eyes brimmed with tears. Even the wounded soldiers who were conscious stared at her with something beyond gratitude, recognition, like they were staring at a ghost. Dr. Peters whispered, ashamed, I had no idea. None of us did, Janet said softly. Rodriguez lowered his salute slowly, his voice steady. Heroes don't usually announce themselves. They just show up when you need them most. Clara closed her eyes. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted to be seen, but the silence pressed down on her, heavier than exhaustion. She opened her eyes again, her voice a whisper. Rodriguez, you made it home. Yes, ma'am, he said, his voice thick. Because of you, we all did. The room was still. No applause, no cheering, just silence, reverent and raw. And Clara realized there was no hiding anymore. How do you live two lives at once? One as an invisible nurse, the other as a legend whispered about in barracks and battlefields. That was the question Clara Jamison could no longer escape. The room still hadn't recovered from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's words. The silence after his salute was heavy, oppressive. Nurses shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do with their hands. Doctors stared, ashamed. The wounded soldiers, those who could still speak, looked at her with a reverence that stung more than it flattered. Clara hated it. She didn't want eyes on her. She wanted to disappear back into the corners of the ward, back into anonymity, to go back to being just a nurse. But there was no return, not after this. Rodriguez lowered his salute at last, though his gaze never wavered. You saved lives in Ramadi, ma'am. You saved mine. And tonight, he swept his arm toward the room. You did it again. Dr. Richardson swallowed, his lips parting, but no words came. He had spent months dismissing her, calling her too soft, doubting her under pressure. Now he stood pale, embarrassed, unable to meet her eyes. Dr. Peters, the youngest of them, looked devastated. He had challenged her authority only hours earlier. Now, shame colored his face. His lips trembled as if he wanted to apologize, but the words died in his throat. Clara looked around, exhausted, sweat dripping from her hairline. She wanted to say something, anything, but her voice wouldn't come. All she could manage was the truth. I'm tired. Her knees bent, and she dropped heavily into a chair. For a moment, she felt the full weight of the last 18 hours pressed down on her chest. She bowed her head, her hands resting limp on her thighs. No one moved. The room was still, as if everyone feared shattering the fragile air. Finally, Janet broke the silence. She stepped forward, her face lined with awe and quiet sorrow. Clara, how long? Clara looked up slowly. Her eyes, those tired, steady eyes, met Janet's. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she lifted her wrist. The faded Ramadi bandage clung to her skin, brown with sweat and old blood. She unwound it gently, carefully, until the fabric lay crumpled in her palm. Her thumb brushed the worn threads, her lips parted. Since Ramadi. Rodriguez inhaled sharply, his jaw clenching. Others frowned, confused, the name still foreign to them. But to Clara and to Rodriguez, it wasn't just a place. It was a scar. Dr. Martinez spoke at last, his voice hoarse. You were in combat. Clara's gaze flicked to him, unreadable. We didn't call it that, we called it survival. Her words sank like stones. The wounded stirred. One young Marine, propped against pillows, whispered, I heard about her. My sergeant told stories. A nurse who showed up in firefights, crawled through gunfire just to reach the wounded. They said she wasn't real, a ghost. Another soldier nodded weakly. My squad leader said the same. He told us if you were bleeding out, sometimes she just appeared. They called her the Ramadi medic. The whispers spread. A legend breathed into reality before their eyes. Clara wanted to stop it, wanted to silence them. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a myth. She was just a woman who had refused to leave men to die in the dust. But legends don't care what you want. They grow on their own. Dr. Richardson finally forced himself forward. His voice cracked. Clara, I owe you an apology. We all do. Her head lifted, her eyes narrowing faintly. No. He blinked, no. No apology needed, she said softly. We all did our jobs tonight, that's all that matters. But Richardson shook his head. His pride was gone. What you did wasn't just a job, it was something else entirely. The younger nurses inched closer, timid, curious, no longer whispering judgment. Now they whispered questions. How do you keep going for 18 hours straight? One asked, her voice fragile. I couldn't. Clara's eyes softened. She answered with the truth. You don't think about the time, you don't think about the exhaustion, you only think about the person in front of you, one at a time, then the next, then the next. But how did you know what to do? Another pressed. You moved like you'd done it all before. Clara's thumb brushed the bandage in her palm. Her voice dropped, because I had. The weight of her words silenced them again. The wounded soldiers, listening quietly from their beds, found ways to show their gratitude. Private Thompson, the 19-year-old whose leg she had saved, managed to hobble forward on crutches. He placed a wilted flower from the hospital courtyard on her desk. Ma'am, he whispered, we're alive because of you, Ramadi won't forget. Another, Corporal Williams, scribbled a shaky note and slid it across the counter. His handwriting wavered, but the words were clear. You gave me a second chance to see my daughter grow up. I'll tell her about you someday. One by one they came, not with medals, not with ceremonies, but with quiet gestures that meant everything. A squeeze of her hand, a whispered thank you, a look that held more weight than any speech. Rodriguez waited until the last of them stepped back. Then he moved forward, his posture still perfect, though his eyes were heavy with memory. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Clara nodded faintly. What you did tonight and what you did in Ramadi, there are men serving all over the world who are alive because of you. They're fathers now, husbands, sons. You gave them futures they never would have had. Clara's throat tightened. She swallowed hard. Rodriguez, can I tell you something? Yes, ma'am. Her eyes glistened. Her voice softened to almost a whisper. The heroes aren't the ones who get remembered. The real heroes are the ones who show up tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until there's nobody left to save. Rodriguez's lips trembled. He gave a single nod, his eyes glistening too. Clara closed her fist around the bandage and slid it back into her pocket. The weight of it against her hip was grounding, steady. Tomorrow she would tie her hair back into a simple ponytail. She would put on fresh scrubs. She would blend into the background again. Because that's what she believed heroes should do, not announce themselves, not demand recognition, just keep showing up. And yet, something in the room had shifted permanently. The doctors who once dismissed her now moved around her carefully, reverently. The nurses who once whispered about her now looked at her like a guide. And the soldiers, the ones whose blood stained her gloves, now stared at her like a living legend. Clara hated the word, legend. It made her sound untouchable, like she wasn't just human, but tonight she had no choice but to carry it. As the night drew quiet and the hum of medical equipment softened, Clara sat alone at a cold metal chair in the corner. No cameras, no reporters, just the stillness after the storm. Her head dropped into her hands. For the first time in 18 hours, she allowed herself a single tear. Not because of the praise, not because of the recognition, but because she remembered every face she hadn't been able to save. In Ramadi, in every battle since, those were the ghosts she still carried. And she knew they weren't done with her yet. What do you do when the ghosts of your past suddenly step into the room with you? When the identity you buried deep, the one you swore you'd never reveal, is suddenly spoken aloud for everyone to hear. Clara Jamison lay awake long after her shift ended. The facility had finally gone quiet. The patients were stable. The exhausted staff had been dismissed to their bunks, but Clara couldn't rest. She sat on the edge of a narrow cot in the on-call room, her hair damp from the quick shower she had forced herself to take. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the faded bandage from her pocket again. The bloodstains had long ago dried into the fabric, brown instead of red. The edges were frayed, nearly falling apart. She held it gently, like it might disintegrate in her hands if she gripped too tight. Her thumb traced the pattern of the stains, as if searching for meaning in the chaos. Ramadi. The word pulsed in her mind like a wound that would never close. It had been years, and yet in moments like this, the distance collapsed. She could still smell the acrid smoke, hear the rattle of gunfire, feel the sting of sand grinding into her eyes and teeth as she crouched low in the dirt, trying to keep pressure on a soldier's artery while bullets cracked overhead. She remembered the first time she arrived in that desert city. The convoy had rolled through streets that looked more like skeletons than buildings, hollow shells riddled with bullet holes, rubble choking the roads. Children stared with eyes too old for their faces. Women hid behind shattered doorways. The Marines in her unit had been hard-faced, already worn thin. And she had been terrified. But fear didn't matter, not when the wounded started coming in. She remembered one night most of all. A firefight had erupted near the eastern checkpoint. Casualties poured in, half carried, half dragged by their brothers in arms. She had barely been in country 2 weeks when the flood began. Clara had been told to stay back. "You're not combat," they said. "You're just medical support. Let the docs handle the trauma." But the docs were overwhelmed. There were too many bodies, too much blood, and Clara couldn't stand still. She had crawled through smoke and debris to reach a Marine screaming on the ground, his leg nearly severed. The fire had been so close she could feel the heat singeing the back of her neck, but she ignored it. She pressed her hands into the wound, felt hot blood gushing between her fingers, and screamed for someone to hand her a tourniquet. That Marine lived. She remembered his name. She remembered every name. That night they had whispered about her, not in mockery but in disbelief. A nurse who wasn't supposed to be on the line, stitching wounds under fire. Someone muttered the medic from Ramadi, and the name spread like a rumor that refused to die. It was never supposed to follow her home. Now, sitting alone in the quiet hospital thousands of miles away, Clara stared at the bandage in her palm and wondered if burying that identity had ever been possible. The knock on the door startled her. She clenched her fist quickly, shoving the bandage back into her pocket before answering. "Yeah." The door creaked open. Janet stepped in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Her eyes were soft, careful. She set one mug on the table near Clara and didn't sit until Clara nodded faintly. For a while they just sat in silence. Finally Janet spoke. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Clara stared at the floor. "Because it doesn't matter." "It matters to them." Janet gestured toward the ward. "To the ones alive because of you." Clara shook her head, her voice quiet. "They don't need to know, they just need to heal. My story doesn't help them." Janet studied her. "But it might help us, the staff, the ones who doubted you." A bitter smile touched Clara's lips. You think a story will make them respect me. Respect doesn't last. Actions do. And tomorrow, they'll forget the legend and go back to seeing me as the quiet nurse who eats lunch alone. But Janet shook her head firmly. No, they won't forget, not after last night. Clara's chest tightened. She didn't want to be remembered. She didn't want to be a legend. Legends were too heavy to carry. Do you ever wonder, Janet said softly, if maybe the reason you hide it isn't to protect them, but to protect yourself? The question landed harder than Clara expected. She turned away, her jaw tight. Janet didn't push. She just sipped her coffee and let the silence answer. When she finally left, Clara lay back on her cot, staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly, a reminder that the world outside this room was still moving. Her eyes burned, she closed them. And the ghosts came back. She saw the boy from Ramadi again, Private Miller, barely 19, a farm kid from Nebraska. He had bled out in her arms because she couldn't stop the shrapnel tearing through his chest. She had pressed her hands against him until they were slick and red, whispering, "Stay with me, please, stay with me," even as his eyes dimmed. That was the night she tore a strip from her own sleeve, stained it with his blood and kept it. Not because it was a trophy, but because she refused to let him vanish completely. That bandage became her reminder that saving one life, even just one, was a victory. But every time she touched it, she also remembered the one she couldn't save. And that was the weight she carried. The next morning, Clara tied her hair back again, put on fresh scrubs, and walked into the ward. She kept her head down, her steps quiet. She hoped for invisibility. But the eyes followed her now. Nurses who once ignored her now straightened when she walked past. Doctors who once dismissed her now paused, uncertain how to address her. The wounded greeted her with small nods, whispers of "ma'am" under their breath. Clara didn't want it, she didn't need it, but it was there all the same. During rounds, Peters finally gathered the courage to speak. His voice cracked. "Nurse Jamison, I just wanted to say I was wrong." Clara looked at him evenly. "We were all wrong at some point. What matters is how we move forward." He blinked at her, surprised by the gentleness in her tone. Then he nodded, chastened. Later, Richardson approached her in the hallway. His voice was low, almost ashamed. "Clara, I underestimated you, and I'll admit I feel guilty for it." She stopped facing him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were piercing. "Then don't waste time on guilt. Use it. Treat your patients like every second counts, because it does." He swallowed hard. "I will." And she walked on. The truth was, Clara didn't need apologies. She didn't need recognition. She needed people to show up, to do the work, to save lives without hesitation. That was the only thing that mattered. That evening, Rodriguez found her again. He was off duty now, his uniform jacket slung over his shoulder, his posture finally relaxed. But his eyes, those eyes still burned with memory. "Ma'am," he said softly, "do you ever wonder if you saved too many?" Clara froze. "What do you mean?" Rodriguez shrugged, his voice raw. "Some of the guys you saved, they went back out there. Some didn't make it home the second time. Do you ever regret?" The question cut deep. Clara's throat tightened. She had asked herself the same thing countless times. Was saving them once only delaying the inevitable? Was she prolonging suffering instead of ending it? She closed her eyes briefly. "I regret every loss, but never the act of trying, because every extra day we give someone might be the day they see their child's first steps or hear their mother's voice one last time. That's worth it." Rodriguez's jaw clenched. He nodded slowly. "I guess that's what makes you different." Clara shook her head faintly. "No, it just makes me human." But in her pocket, her fingers brushed the bandage again, and she wondered if that was true. Because some nights she didn't feel human at all. Why was it harder to face admiration than bullets? Clara Jamison asked herself that question as she walked the halls the following morning. The gunfire of Ramadi had never unnerved her the way these new stairs did. She tied her hair back the same way she always had, pulled on fresh scrubs and walked with her usual quiet steps. But things weren't the same anymore. Nurses paused when she passed. Doctors stopped speaking mid-sentence, their eyes following her. Even patients, some half-drugged, others groaning softly in their beds, tried to straighten when she entered the room. She wanted none of it. To them she was something she didn't recognize, a myth walking in flesh, a legend made real. To herself she was just tired. The day moved with an unnatural weight. Questions followed her like shadows. "Nurse Jamison, how did you keep working so long? Did you really serve in Ramadi? Is it true you crawled under gunfire just to save a Marine?" She didn't answer, she didn't confirm, she didn't deny. She simply moved patient to patient, checking vitals, adjusting IV lines, suturing small wounds with the same precision she always had. The legend could live in whispers. She wasn't going to feed it. But the silence became louder than words. At noon, she ducked into the break room. Her sandwich sat unopened on the table in front of her, a medical journal spread across her lap. Normally, no one noticed her here, but now the room filled with the weight of eyes. Dr. Peters, still flushed with shame from his outburst the night of the crisis, shifted awkwardly. "Clara." She didn't look up. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I doubted you. I spoke out of turn." His voice cracked. "If it wasn't for you that night, we would have lost half the patients, maybe more." Clara turned a page slowly. "Don't apologize." He hesitated, but "Just be better next time," she said softly. Her eyes flicked up, pinning him with a look that was neither cruel nor forgiving, only steady. "That's all any of us can do." The room was silent. Peter swallowed and nodded, chastened. He left his untouched coffee on the table and slipped out. Janet, sitting across the room, studied Clara quietly. When the others finally trickled out, leaving them alone, she spoke. "They don't know what to do with you," Janet said. "They thought you were a shadow, and now they know you're a fire." Clara's lips curved faintly bitter. "Fires burn out." "Not always," Janet said. "Sometimes they light the way." Clara said nothing. She picked at her sandwich and pretended to read. That evening, Rodriguez returned. His posture was less rigid now, but the weight in his eyes hadn't shifted. He found her by the nurse's station, hunched over charts. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you ever think about telling it, the full story?" Clara stiffened. "No." "You should," Rodriguez pressed. "The men, they deserve to know. People here, they should know what you did." Clara's jaw tightened. "That's the problem. The moment you start telling it, it becomes about you. It stops being about them." Rodriguez tilted his head. "Maybe it's both. Maybe it has to be." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Rodriguez, do you know what happens when they start calling you a hero?" He frowned. "What?" "They stop listening. They stop learning. They turn you into a story they tell instead of a standard they follow. And people die because they think one legend will always show up to save them." The Marine went silent. Clara sighed, her hands folding the chart closed. "I didn't save anyone. They saved themselves. I was just there. Do you understand?" But Rodriguez didn't look convinced. He nodded, respectful, but his eyes told her he carried a different truth. That night, alone in the on-call room, Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent hum buzzed faintly. Her hand slipped into her pocket and pulled out the bandage. She pressed it against her chest and closed her eyes. And she remembered. She remembered the boy who hadn't made it, Private Miller, the blood pouring through her fingers, the rasp in his throat as he tried to say, "Tell my mom," before the words stopped forever. She remembered the sound of mortars shaking the building while she stitched in the dark with nothing but a flashlight clamped between her teeth. She remembered crawling through shattered glass to reach a man she couldn't save. These were not stories she wanted to tell. They weren't lessons. They were scars. And yet, the whispers outside her door were growing louder. The next day, Richardson stopped her in the hall. His arrogance was gone. His voice was soft, almost reverent. "Clara, what you did in Ramadi, what you did here, we should honor that." She looked him dead in the eye. "Honor me by showing up tomorrow. Honor me by not freezing when someone's bleeding out in front of you. Honor me by doing your damn job." Richardson's mouth opened, then closed. He nodded slowly. Word spread beyond the ward. Other units in the facility began speaking of her. A nurse who had carried men through fire. A medic who refused to rest until the last patient was stable. Soldiers from outside her shift sought her out, hopping for a glimpse, a word, anything. And Clara felt the walls closing in. She didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't want to be a lesson. But the truth gnawed at her. The more they looked at her like a legend, the more she felt herself slipping away from reality, and the more she feared the ghosts would never leave her alone. One evening, sitting by the window, Janet found her staring at the courtyard. Clara's face was pale, her eyes shadowed. "You can't carry them all," Janet said gently. Clara didn't turn. "I don't carry them, they carry me. Every stitch, every breath, every night I can't sleep. They're the ones keeping me going." Janet hesitated, and when they stopped, Clara finally looked at her. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from exhaustion deeper than tears could reach. "Then I stopped too." The words lingered between them, heavy, unshakable. That night Clara lay in bed with the bandage pressed against her heart. She whispered the names she remembered: Miller, Johnson, Alvarez, Carter, one by one into the dark. Not prayers, not goodbyes, just acknowledgments, reminders. Because she feared that if she stopped whispering their names, they would disappear. And with them, so would she. What happens when survival turns into spectacle? Clara Jamison had spent her life avoiding the spotlight, but now the world around her seemed intent on dragging her into it. 3 days had passed since the 18-hour night. The hospital had returned to its rhythms, the hum of monitors, the shuffle of boots, the clipped voices of doctors on rounds. But beneath that rhythm was something new, something Clara could feel pressing against her with every step. Eyes, whispers, deference where once there had been dismissal. She hated it. It wasn't that she resented respect. She resented being turned into a story. Legends were neat. Legends were polished. Legends erased the grit, the blood, the trembling hands, and whispered prayers. Legends made you into something you were. And Clara Jamison was not a legend. She was a woman who had crawled through hell with nothing but a medic bag and a will that refused to quit. Now, everywhere she went, people expected something from her. The younger nurses cornered her with questions. "How did you know what to do that night? Can you teach us how to triage faster? Did you really?" She cut them off gently but firmly. "Focus on the patient in front of you, that's all." Doctors, too, shifted in her presence. Richardson, once arrogant, once dismissive, now carried himself with cautious respect. Martinez listened instead of interrupting. Peters looked at her like he wanted to learn, but also like he feared her judgment. Even the patients treated her differently. Some saluted. Others whispered, "Ma'am." One Marine, his chest still bandaged, tried to sit up straighter when she entered his room, as though her presence demanded formality. She wanted to scream at them all. "Stop looking at me like that. Stop expecting me to be more than I am." But she didn't. She just kept moving. Quiet, efficient, invisible in everything except their eyes. One evening, as she finished suturing a small wound on a corporal's hand, Rodriguez approached again. He lingered in the doorway, his frame filling the space, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said softly when she finally noticed him, "there's talk." Clara tied off the last stitch and didn't look up. "There's always talk." "Not like this," Rodriguez pressed. Word spread, beyond the ward. Other units are saying the Ramadi medic is back. Some are saying you should be recognized officially. Clara froze, the needle trembled in her fingers. Recognized. Commendation, maybe more. They want you to speak at a briefing, share what you did, what you've learned. Clara set the tools down carefully, her jaw tight. No. Rodriguez frowned. With respect, ma'am, refusing might not be an option. She turned then, her eyes sharp. Everything is an option. I didn't do this for medals or speeches. I did it because men were bleeding out on the floor. That's the only story worth telling. Rodriguez held her gaze, then nodded reluctantly. I'll tell them you declined. When he left, Clara sat alone, staring at her hands. They were steady again, but inside she felt like she was unraveling. Later that night, Janet found her at the sink, scrubbing her hands long after the blood had washed away. Clara's skin was raw red, the soap biting at open cracks. Clara, Janet said softly, you're hurting yourself. Clara didn't stop. I can't get it off. Janet hesitated. Get what off? The weight, Clara whispered. The expectation, the ghosts, it's all on me. Her voice broke for the first time since Ramadi. Janet stepped forward, touched her shoulder gently, then stopped carrying it alone. But Clara shook her head violently, pulling away. If I let anyone else carry it, it'll crush them. For the first time, Janet saw the fractured lines in the woman she had thought was unbreakable. Not weakness, no, Clara still had none of that, but something worse, a deep, gnawing isolation. 2 nights later, her prediction came true. The hospital was quieter, the chaos had ebbed, the patients stabilized, and that was when command came. 2 officers arrived in pressed uniforms, crisp voices carrying authority. They asked for Clara by name. She stood in the hallway, hands folded behind her back, her ponytail neat, her scrubs clean. Ms. Jamison, one began, your work during the mass casualty event has come to our attention. We've heard stories. Clara's chest tightened. She stayed silent. The officer continued. We believe your example could serve others. We'd like you to brief medical staff on crisis response. Share your techniques, your experience. Her lips pressed thin. No. The officers exchanged a look. Excuse us. No, Clara repeated, her voice calm but unshakable. I'm not a symbol, I'm not a lesson, I'm a nurse. I treat the person in front of me, that's all. The second officer's brow furrowed. With respect, Ms. Jamison, refusing this request could be viewed as insubordination. Clara's eyes flashed just briefly but enough to silence him. Then view it however you want. I will not turn death into a classroom. The officers stiffened. One muttered something about escalation, then they left. Janet appeared moments later, having overheard enough to know. Clara, what are you doing? They'll force you if they have to. Clara leaned against the wall, her shoulders slumping for the first time. If they force me, I'll walk. Janet's eyes widened. You quit. Clara's jaw tightened. I'd rather disappear than let them turn this into a performance. That night sleep didn't come. Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the bandage pressed to her chest. And the memories returned. She saw again the faces in Ramadi, not the one she saved, but the one she lost. Private Miller, Sergeant Alvarez, Captain Reese. Their names etched in her bones. If she stood on a stage and told a polished version of the story, what happened to them? Did they become background noise to applause? Did their final moments become bullet points in a lecture? No, she wouldn't allow it. The next morning she walked into the ward as usual, hair tied, scrubs clean, head down. But the eyes followed her as always, respectful, reverent, heavy. And for the first time, Clara felt something dangerous. Not pride, not gratitude, but the weight of being trapped by her own silence. The legend was out now, and legends don't fade back into shadows. What happens when silence becomes its own kind of prison? That was the question Clara Jamison woke to every morning now. The hospital moved in rhythms she knew well, morning rounds, chart checks, the constant hum of monitors. But beneath the ordinary beats of routine, a tension simmered. She could feel it in the way people paused when she entered, in the way whispers followed her through the halls, in the way her name, Ramadi Medic, carried through the building like contraband. She wanted none of it, and yet there it was, shadowing her every step. For years, Clara had built her armor out of invisibility. She had been content to let others underestimate her, dismiss her, overlook her. It gave her freedom. It gave her peace. But the armor was gone now, shattered the moment Rodriguez saluted and spoke her name aloud. And Clara was left exposed. It wasn't medals or ceremonies that terrified her. It was the expectation. Because once people decide you're a legend, they don't see you anymore. They see what they need: a myth, a symbol, something bigger than flesh and blood. And Clara was just flesh and blood. The officers returned. They didn't come with threats this time. They came with promises. "Ms. Jamison," one said, his tone smooth, rehearsed, "you could help train hundreds of nurses, thousands. What you know could save lives beyond this facility." Clara sat at the edge of her chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "What I know isn't teachable." "With respect, ma'am, it has to be. You have experience none of our textbooks can capture." Clara's jaw clenched. "Experience is blood. It's men dying in your hands. You don't put that in a classroom." The officer leaned forward. "If you stay silent, you hoard it, and men will die who could have lived." The words hit hard. She felt them like a blow to the chest, because wasn't that what haunted her most? The ones who didn't make it, the ones she couldn't save. If her silence meant another nurse froze when they should have acted, another soldier bled out when they could have lived, then wasn't she guilty? She dismissed the officers with clipped words, but their message lingered. That night Clara sat in the on-call room with the faded bandage in her hand. She pressed it against her forehead and whispered the names again. Miller, Alvarez, Reese. The ghosts were steady companions now. They didn't speak, but she knew what they would ask. "If you could keep one more of us alive, would you?" Her chest tightened until she couldn't breathe. Janet found her like that, hunched on the cot, hands gripping the fabric so tight her knuckles whitened. "Clara," Janet said softly, "they're not wrong. You could save more if you told them." Clara's head snapped up, eyes fierce. "At what cost? Do you know what it does to me every time I close my eyes? Do you know what it's like to hold a 19-year-old boy while he bleeds out and realize you can't save him? If I tell them, Janet, they'll turn it into a lesson plan, a bullet point. And those boys," her voice broke, "those boys deserve better than to be remembered as training material." Janet's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "And what about the boys still alive? The ones who'll come through those doors tomorrow? Do they deserve less because you're afraid of being turned into a story?" The words cut sharp. Clara recoiled like she'd been struck. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. But the lie stung on her tongue. Because she was afraid. Afraid that if she spoke, she'd lose herself completely. That the Ramadi Medic would consume Clara Jamison until there was nothing left of the woman who sat quietly at the back of meetings, mended torn coats in secret, and brought tea to soldiers screaming in their sleep. That night she didn't sleep at all. By morning she was running on fumes. She moved through her shift mechanically, her eyes shadowed, her body present but her mind elsewhere. She stitched, she bandaged, she adjusted IV lines. But her thoughts looped endlessly around one truth: she couldn't keep running. The staff felt it too, the weight in the air, the sense that something inside Clara was cracking. At noon, Richardson cornered her gently in the corridor. His arrogance had long vanished, replaced by a quiet deference. "Clara," he said carefully, "we don't need you to be a hero. We just need you to teach us how not to fail." Clara stopped in her tracks. She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had once dismissed her as too soft, now standing before her, humbled, asking not for stories but for guidance. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say no, she wanted to walk away. But her hand slipped into her pocket, brushed against the bandage, and she remembered Miller's eyes, his voice. "Tell my mom." Her chest clenched. That afternoon, Clara agreed to meet with a small group of nurses. Not a briefing, not a lecture, just a conversation. They gathered in a quiet corner room, 6 of them, young, nervous, eyes wide with respect. Clara sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her shoulders tight. "I'm not here to tell war stories," she said. "I'm here to tell you the only thing that matters." They leaned in. When someone's bleeding out in front of you, don't freeze. Don't wait for orders. Don't look for permission. Move, pressure here, tourniquet there. Every second counts. She stood, grabbed a roll of gauze from the table, and wrapped it around one nurse's arm with quick, practiced precision. Your hands don't get to tremble. Not until later. You hold them together, even if it feels like you're the only thing keeping them alive. Her voice hardened. "And sometimes you'll lose them anyway. You'll do everything right and they'll still die. If you can't live with that, walk away now. Because the ones who survive will need you twice as much." The nurses were silent, their faces pale but determined. Clara sat again, her voice softening. "Don't do it for recognition. Don't do it to be remembered. Do it because in that moment you're all they have." She looked down at her hands. "That's all I did. That's all I ever did." When she finished, the room stayed quiet. The nurses didn't applaud. They didn't cheer. They just nodded, their eyes solemn, carrying the weight of what she had given them. And Clara realized something. This wasn't spectacle. It wasn't performance. It wasn't even storytelling. It was survival passed hand to hand, heart to heart. For the first time, she felt a sliver of peace. But it was fragile. Because outside that room the legend still grew, the whispers still spread, and Clara knew she hadn't escaped the storm. She had only stepped deeper into it. What happens when you can no longer hide from the truth of who you are? Clara Jamison asked herself that as she sat in the dim light of the ward, the hum of machines steady around her. She had tried to be invisible. She had tried to bury Ramadi under silence, under shifts, under the quiet rhythm of tending to one patient at a time. But invisibility doesn't last when others insist on seeing you. The whispers had grown into stories. The stories had grown into something heavier. Now, soldiers across the facility spoke her name like it was armor. Staff quoted her words in meetings, and command kept pressing for her to step forward officially, to take the role of teacher, of symbol. She wanted to disappear. But everywhere she turned, her reflection stared back in their eyes, not Clara, not the quiet nurse, but the Ramadi medic. The weight was unbearable. Late one night, Clara found herself in the courtyard. The air was cool, the sky a deep stretch of stars. She sat on a bench, the faded bandage in her palm. She rubbed the worn fabric between her fingers, tracing each fray like a roadmap of her past. She whispered the names again. Miller, Alvarez, Reese. Each syllable cracked her chest open a little more. She didn't hear Rodriguez approach until he was beside her. He sat quietly, not asking permission. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder if legends choose us, not the other way around?" Clara stared at the bandage. "I don't want to be a legend. Legends are lies." Rodriguez tilted his head, his voice low. "Then make it a true one." Clara looked at him sharply. His eyes were steady but not worshipful, just tired, grateful, human. She shook her head. "If I step into it, it swallows me, and I disappear." Rodriguez leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "With respect, ma'am, you've already disappeared. You hide behind silence, behind humility, but people still see you. They saw you when you wouldn't rest for 18 hours. They saw you when you told death to wait its turn. You can't undo that." Her chest ached. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't because he was right. The legend wasn't a choice anymore. It existed. It breathed. The only choice left was what she did with it. The next morning, Clara walked into the ward as always, ponytail neat, scrubs clean, bandage tucked in her pocket. The whispers followed. The glances lingered. She ignored them as she always had. But when she entered the briefing room that afternoon, she didn't walk to her usual quiet corner. She walked to the front. The room went still. Nurses, doctors, even officers paused mid-motion. Clara stood with her hands folded in front of her. For a moment, she said nothing. Just let the silence settle. Then in her calm, steady voice, she spoke. "You all think I'm something I'm not." The words hit hard. The room shifted uneasily. "You call me a legend, a ghost, a hero, but I'm not. I'm just a nurse who refuses to stand still when someone's dying. That's it. That's the whole story." She looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. "If you want to know the secret, it's this. Stop waiting for permission. Stop hiding behind protocol. Move, pressure here, tourniquet there, keep them breathing, that's all. And when they die anyway, because sometimes they will, you show up the next day and do it again. Because that's the job." Her voice trembled just slightly. "I'm not a hero, I'm not special, I'm not invincible. I'm just someone who showed up, over and over, until they started calling me something I never wanted to be." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the bandage, held it up between her fingers. "This is from Ramadi. It's a reminder, not of who I saved, but of who I didn't. Every stitch I've sewn since then, every wound I've touched has been for them, not for medals, not for recognition, for them." Her hand closed around it, her voice soft. "If you remember me, don't remember a legend. Remember a nurse who did her job, and then go do yours." She placed the bandage back in her pocket. The room was silent. No applause, no cheers, just silence. And in that silence, something shifted. The doctors no longer looked at her like a myth. The nurses no longer looked at her like a ghost. They looked at her like a mirror, a reminder of what they could be. Clara stepped down, walked out, and didn't look back. That evening, as she washed her hands at the sink, Janet appeared beside her. For once, Janet didn't speak. She just reached over, gently squeezed Clara's shoulder, and nodded. Clara nodded back. Nothing more was needed. The days that followed weren't easier. The whispers still spread, the eyes still followed, but something inside Clara had shifted. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't embracing the legend either. She was simply existing in the space between human, flawed, steady. And that was enough. Weeks later, as she walked the courtyard during a rare moment of quiet, a young nurse approached her nervously. "Ma'am," the nurse stammered, "I just wanted to say, when the alarms went off last night, I remembered what you said. I didn't freeze, I moved. And he lived." Clara paused, her chest tightened. She nodded once. "Good, that's the only thing that matters." The nurse's eyes glistened. She whispered, "Thank you," and hurried away. Clara stood alone beneath the stars. She pulled the bandage from her pocket, unwrapped it slowly, and held it in her palm. She thought of Miller, Alvarez, Reese. She thought of Thompson and Williams and Rodriguez. She thought of all the names, both saved and lost, carved into her memory. And for the first time in years, she felt the weight ease. Not gone, it would never be gone, but lighter, shared. She tied the bandage back around her wrist, not as a burden, not as a chain, but as a promise. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.